It's the summer of 2004. I'm somewhere in Cambridgeshire in a supermarket with a new girl that I've just been seeing for a month or two, probably a couple of months, I think. I can't remember the specifics of where we were. It was a small town, one of these towns with a cathedral. And, if you're like me and it takes you a long time to get really comfortable in a relationship, the last thing that you want to hear when you've just started seeing someone is what I heard in the supermarket. I found myself approached by a complete stranger, a woman, maybe in her late 30s, and she just stopped me in front of this new girlfriend and she just said, "Excuse me, this might sound rude, but when you were growing up, did your house smell of poo?" I was like, I was mortified, probably a year away from being this kind of comfortable with this girl to allow that kind of vocabulary into the relationship. If we were to make a year, this was not the kind of thing I would ever be able to deal with easily. I just looked at the girl I was with. I just gave her a kind of baffled look, and I just said to the woman, "Sorry, no." We just carried on walking on, but I was rattled. I think I just muttered something to the girl about that lady being a fruitcake. But the fact is that I was really rattled. It was one of many strange incidents that I experienced after the passing of my mum, many of which have a scientific explanation. I think most people who've suffered a bereavement, you are plunged into a spell of, depression. Which I didn't recognize at the time. I was spending a lot of time in bed during the days, and I've never been a guy who naps during the day, but I spent a couple of years basically sleeping during the days and working at night. I could not deal with the loss. I did not understand what was happening to me, and there were things that have rational scientific explanations. For the first time in my life, I started to experience what I later came to know to be sleep paralysis. The first time I experienced that, I was quite, perturbed by it. It was I'd never ever experienced anything like that, but that is quite common if you're feeling very low. Doesn't happen so much to me nowadays, and when it does, I'm not that unsettled by it because I now know what that is, and it's something well known around the globe by different names. I can deal with that now, but back then that was a big thing. There was a very curious dream a few days just after my mum passed away, just before the funeral, where I had probably the clearest dream I've ever had. It felt more than a dream, where my mum's ghost came to pick up her body, and kind of what I read into that was that my mum was quite a selfless character, infuriatingly so at times. She'd always put other people first, and I read into that she didn't want to put us into the hassle. Put us to the hassle of, burying her. She wanted to organise her own funeral. And I remember I was sat on the stairs in this dream. I was a 4-year-old. I've told this story in my old radio series for Resonance, The Letter. I've told it, I think, in episode 5. I was sat on the stairs. I was weeping. In this particular dream, I was about 4 years old. I had the long hair that my dad never allowed me to cut. Which meant I spent the first decade of my life looking like a girl. And suddenly my mum's ghost came back in and said, "Why are you crying? You couldn't have done anything." And that dream always stayed with me. That I could never quite explain. To this day, that felt like more than a dream. Of course, maybe I'm reading too much into it. But that woman in the supermarket rattled me, and we continued doing our shopping. Occasionally we wandered into an aisle where that woman was, and she and I caught each other's eye, and I just made sure I then turned away. I didn't want to speak to her again. Um, she looked at me at that the second time I saw her. She looked at me like she knew that I was lying. It was a strange thing. And here is the thing. Here is why I was rattled. The place we lived in, it was a throwback to another world, really. Where I'd grown up, as I've said, it was a very multicultural community, and when in my earliest years, it was full of bedsits, and most of the communities were foreign communities, Spanish, French, Maltese, Italian, Portuguese, West Indian, Nigerians. And then eventually that community started to change. The yuppies started to come in, the houses became flats, the bedsits almost disappeared, except in our building, number 48, the last house on Mayflower Road. And at one point, probably for around a decade or so, there were four different nationalities in there. So you imagine four different nationalities, none were British, all cooking their own foods. And the smell from those foods, I'm not saying it was a bad smell, but the smell from those foods, obviously, like any other house, would go into the communal hallways. So whenever I had British friends come around, English friends, the first thing they would say is, "God, what a stink!" These days, it's the kind of smell you would smell probably in a street market, which are very fashionable these days with the middle classes, the foodies. But maybe that building was ahead of its time by about 25 years, but there was a strong smell of food. And when you throw into the mix the fact that there was a communal loo to be shared by the entire building, then you can understand why I was rattled by this woman coming up to me out of the blue, a woman I'd never met, and saying what she said. And I was disappointed with her as well, because there was no way of her knowing whether this girl I was with, whether that was a new relationship or not. She had no way of knowing how comfortable we were with each other. She put herself first. She put her overwhelming need to approach me with this rather strange personal question above how comfortable I might be with this girl. So that's disappointing. If I had been her, if I'd had these kind of medium traits or whatever it was that she had, no matter how big the urge to ask this question, if I found myself wanting to ask this question of a guy who was with a particular girl, I'd try and look at them and think, are they comfortable? Is that a new couple? If they're quite clingy, they're a new couple. If they're kind of, walking around, not even holding each other's hands, barely talking to each other, they've been together for a while. I didn't want the relationship fast-tracked by that kind of toilet talk, and that's, when I see couples, when, couples are married or couples have been together for a while, if you're experienced when it comes to relationships, it's, the mystery's gone in these situations. When you meet someone, you want to keep it as mysterious as it can be for as long as possible. If you can drag that mystery out for a year, great. This strange woman really did her utmost to kill that right away. This girl, I don't think, thought that much more about that very strange incident. I don't think we discussed it after we left the supermarket, but I was really, really rattled. When I returned to London, I think I returned to London on the Sunday evening, and I was living, I think, in Balham at the time. And I think I've said in an earlier video last week that my final months at Mayflower, the family bedsit, I slept with the light on. I didn't like being in the place where I'd lost my mum. I slept with the lights on, and obviously I've never been that comfortable sleeping in my own room, because I never had my own room. I was 17 before I moved into the front room to sleep, so I never quite got used to sleeping with a light off, as strange as that sounds. And it didn't take much for me to start sleeping with the light on. So this incident had me, when I got back to London, Slept with the light on for about a week. I was that rattled by it. I mean, what a strange thing for someone to say. And to say it in front of a new girlfriend, it's just one of the strangest moments of my life. And a hard one to explain. A hard one to explain. And the reason I struggled with it was because I thought this is a very personal thing this woman has said. How could she know that? There are some things that you just can't explain. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, please like and share it. If you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, there should be a little prompt coming up round about now, maybe, if my timing is right. Just click subscribe and please let people know about this channel. And I hope you've had a good day. Take care.